Unit 6, POP3, IMAP and SMTP. Let's talk about these terms and try to explain where they are applied. If you are wondering how email works, knowing the difference between POP3 versus IMAP and the role of SMTP is an excellent place to start. This tutorial will explain all those components in a layman's terms and how they work. So buckle up and let's keep reading. POP3 versus IMAP. What are the differences? Both POP3 and IMAP are incoming mail protocols used by email clients to retrieve messages from email servers. So they are used by clients to retrieve messages from email servers. The client can be application based like Thunderbird. There is an application or a software called Thunderbird, or the client can be web based like Gmail or Yahoo. So if something passes over the internet, it is web based. If something is static on a computer or can be installed on a computer, it becomes an application based software. Even though they serve the same function, they do have several differences. What is POP3? POP3, also known as Post Office Protocol version 3, is a one-way incoming mail protocol that downloads a copy of messages from an email server to a local machine. It is a one-way incoming mail protocol that downloads a copy of messages from an email server to a local machine. Once the post office protocol completes the process, it deletes the original data from the server's inbox. It deletes the original data from the server's inbox. However, many providers these days give an option to keep the original copies intact, allowing users to see the same content when accessing messages from a different platform. In general, we recommend this setting for people who only use one device to access emails and want to view their messages offline. It's also useful for those who want to free up an inbox's space that almost exceeds its capacity. Do keep in mind that this protocol cannot synchronize the content of your offline inbox with its online counterpart by default. So if the device that stores the messages is lost or broken, you could lose all the ones you've saved. So if you have your PC at home or your computer at home, or if your computer is always at home, it is better you use this system, because it keeps all your messages offline, which means that you can read them even without data. That is the advantage. However, the disadvantage is if you lose this one device where you kept all your emails and saved them, you lose them forever because they were all backed up there. Hope that is clear. Default POP3 port to establish a connection with an email server. Port 995 SSL/TLS port, also known as POP3S. So what is IMAP? We've talked about POP3. What is IMAP? IMAP stands for Internet Message Access Protocol. Internet Message Access Protocol. And we are saying that As opposed to POP3, IMA is a two-way incoming mail protocol that only downloads email headers instead of its entire content. As a result, the actual email messages are still kept on the server after being fetched for viewing, making them accessible from another platform. This protocol also synchronizes whatever changes made on the email client to the server, hence two-way communication. So if you delete an email, the server on the client side, the server will be updated. If you change anything on the client side, the server will be updated. This configuration is recommended for those who want to interact with their email messages across multiple devices. So you don't have to worry about losing important ones should a device break or get stolen. Another peak of using IMAP is the ease of finding a specific message using a keyword. However, you need to have a stable internet connection to gain full access to all the emails stored in the IMAP server. So this only works over the internet. The email account's storage space limit can also pose some issues to your messages, especially if you use it in high intensity. So if the email account that you've been given has like 1 GB and you have emails that are reaching 1 GB, you have to delete others in order to have the space that you want, or else you won't be able to open these emails. Default IMAP port that IMP connection uses is port 993 SSL/TLS port, also known as IMAPS. The other one was 995. This one is 993. The other one was called POP3S. This one is called IMAPS. If you find it, just know that is a port they use to send emails or to connect to email servers. What is SMTP? Now that we have learned about the incoming protocols POP3 versus IMAP, let's take a look at the one used to handle outgoing emails. When you're sending emails, that is outgoing emails. Simple mail transfer protocol is used to send emails from a local client to a recipient's address. It works side by side with a software called message transfer protocol to transfer electronic messages to their correct destinations. So this one works side by side with a software called a message transfer agent, and this software enables it to transfer electronic messages to their correct destinations. If you're sending to samuel.co to samuel@gmail.com or to samuel@yahoo.com, it is the message transfer agent that will help you do that, to find those destinations and send them to that correct destination as defined. Aside from sending emails, this protocol also acts as a safeguard to filter which messages passes through. It regulates the limit of how many messages an account can send within a time frame. Default SMTP port used by this protocol. Default SMTP port used by this protocol. Port 465 SSL/TLS port, also known as SMTPS. How does sending and receiving emails work? An email message travels through at least two main SMTP servers that belong to the senders and the recipients. First, SMTP connects your client with your email provider server. Next, it checks the email header for relevant information about the sender and the recipient's address. When you were learning communication skills, you learned about letterheads. These include the location of the business, the address, plot number, the name of the business, etc. So in emails, we also have what we call headers. They contain this information, this little information: who the sender is, what the subject of the email is, the email address of the sender and the receiver, etc. So that is what is normally included in the email headers. That's why we are saying that first, SMP connects your client with your email provider server. Next, the SMTP checks the email header for relevant information about the sender and the recipient's address. That is the information that is included in the header. Once a destination is determined, the server will check the location of the domain associated with the address in the domain name system, or the DNS. For example, if you are trying to send a message to email user@gmail.com, the server locates gmail.com and relays the message to that specific computer. Then the recipient's SMTP server delivers the message to the server's mailbox until the intended user logs into their email account. When that happens, either POP3 or IMAP will forward the new message to the recipient's email client so they can view it. Below is the diagram showing the process. Below is the email server. So Bob's laptop. Bob sends the message via SMTP, as you can see from Bob's laptop. The message reaches the email server of Bob's internet service provider. Now, when the message reaches the internet service provider's email server, it runs to the DNS to look up if the email address, if for example the email address is .yahoo.gmail.microsoft.outlook, something like that. So it goes there and checks in the DNS the domain name server or the domain name system server. Then after going there and finding whether it is .gmail or .yahoo, it follows the SMTP to the email server of Mary. So Mary is the recipient. She's the person going to receive the message. It goes there, and when it reaches there, it finds POP3 or IMAP. Since IMAP and POP3 are the two protocols that manage incoming emails or client emails, it is those two that will send the message to reach Mary's desktop or laptop or mobile phone. It is those two that will do the final work of sending the message. So step 1, SMP goes to the email server of the sender, checks the domain name of the email address in the DNS server, then continues to the receiver's email server and then to the receiver. In this POP3 versus IMP article, we have learned that they are intended for the same purpose but have a different approach, with IMAP leaving email content on the server and POP3 downloading it all to your computer. We have also learned that SMTP and the ports used by these three components. We hope that now you have a better understanding of email service, its components, and how it works. So that is all for POP3, IMAP, and SMTP. Let's continue with Unit 7. Unit 7, Domain Name System. Domain Name System. What is Domain Name System or DNS? The Domain Name System is the phone book of the internet. Humans access information online through domain names like NewYorkTimes.com or ESPN.com. Web browsers interact through Internet Protocol, which are also called IP addresses. DNS translates domain names to IP addresses so browsers can load Internet resources. Each device connected to the Internet has a unique IP address which other machines use to find the device. DNS servers eliminate the need for humans to memorize IP addresses, such as 192.168.1.1 in IP version 4, or more complex, newer alphanumeric addresses such as 240:00CB00:2048:1:C629:D782 in IP version 6. How does DNS work? The process of DNS resolution involves converting a host name such as www.example.com, that is the host name, into a computer-friendly IP address such as 192.168.1.1. An IP address is given to each device on the internet, and that address is necessary to find the appropriate internet device, like a street address is used to find a particular home. So the way we use street addresses, that Wright Road, Simanya, Main Street, the way we use street addresses to find a particular shop or location of a home, the same way we use an IP address to find a particular computer on the internet. When a user wants to load a web page, a translation must occur between what a user types into their web browser. For example, example.com, and the machine-friendly address necessary to locate the example.com web page. Remember, we defined what a web page was. In order to understand the process behind the DNS resolution, it's important to learn about the different hardware components a DNS query must pass between. For the web browser, the DNS lookup occurs behind the scenes and requires no interaction from the user's computer apart from the initial request. There are 4 DNS servers involved in loading a web page. DNS recurser. The recurser can be thought of as a librarian who is asked to go find a particular book somewhere in a library. The DNS recurser is a server designed to receive queries from client machines through applications such as web browsers. Typically, the recurser is then available for making additional requests in order to satisfy the client's DNS query. Root name server. The root server is the first step in translating or resolving human readable host names into IP addresses. It can be thought of like an index in a library that points to different racks of books. Typically, it serves as a reference to other more specific locations. TLD name server, that is another type. The top level domain server can be thought of as a specific rack of books in a library. This name server is the next step in the search for a specific IP address, and it hosts the last portion of the host name. In example.com, the TLD or the top level domain is com. Another TLD server that you might have heard of is maybe in the word mautic.sc.ug. The TLD is .ug or ug, that last portion of the web address. Authoritative name server. This final name server can be thought of as a dictionary on a rack of books, in which a specific name can be translated into its definition. The authoritative name server is the last stop in the name server query. If the authoritative name server has access to the requested record, it will return the IP address for the requested host name back to the DNS. Back to the DNS recurser, who will return as the librarian that made the initial request. What's the difference between an authoritative DNS server and a recursive DNS resolver? Both concepts refer to servers, groups of servers that are integral to the DNS infrastructure, but each performs a different role and lives in different locations inside the pipeline of a DNS query. One way to think about the difference is the recursive resolver. Is at the beginning of the DNS query and the authoritative name server is at the end. Recursive DNS resolver. The recursive resolver is the computer that responds to a recursive request from a client and takes the time to track down the DNS record. It does this by making a series of requests until it reaches the authoritative DNS name server for the requested record, or times out or returns an error if no record is found. Luckily, recursive DNS resolvers do not always need to make multiple requests in order to track down the records needed to respond to a client. Caching is a data persistent process that helps short-circuit the necessary requests by serving the requested resource record earlier in the DNS lookup. That is what caching. So that is the DNS record request sequence. From CDN client, you go to the DNS recursive resolver, then to the DNS root name server, then to the DNS TLD name server, and then to the cloudflare.com authoritative name server. So that is the DNS record request sequence. Authoritative DNS server. Put simply, an authoritative DNS server is a server that actually holds and is responsible for DNS resource records. This is the server at the bottom of the DNS lookup chain that will respond with the queried resource record, ultimately allowing the web browser making the request to reach the IP address needed to access a website or other web resources. An authoritative name server can satisfy queries from its own data without needing to query another source. So it has some level of independence. It doesn't need to over-rely on other sources of data. So, an authoritative name server can satisfy queries from its own data without needing to query another source, as it is the final source of truth for certain DNS records. So that is the DNS request sequence. Starts from the CDN client, it goes to the DNS recursive resolver, then to the DNS root name server, then to the DNS TLD name server, and then to the authoritative name server. It's worth mentioning that in instances where the query is for a subdomain, such as for.example.com or blog.cloudflare.com, an additional name server will be added to the sequence after the authoritative name server, which is responsible for storing the subdomaine's CNAME record. The illustration is below. So after the authoritative server or after the authoritative name server, you can see that there is another authoritative server that has name server that has been added, though this will belong to a subdomain. There is a key difference between many DNS services and the one that Cloudflare provides. Different DNS recursive resolvers such as Google DNS, OpenDNS, and providers like Comcast all maintain data center installations of DNS recursive resolvers. These resolvers allow for quick and easy queries through optimized clusters of DNS optimized computer systems, but they are fundamentally different than the name servers hosted by Cloudflare. Cloudflare maintains infrastructure level name servers that are integral to the functioning of the internet. What are the steps in a DNS lookup? For most situations, DNS is concerned with a domain name being translated into the appropriate IP address. To learn how this process works, it helps to follow the path of a DNS lookup, such as it travels from a web browser through the DNS lookup process and back again. Let's take a look at the steps. Note: often DNS lookup information will be cached either locally inside the querying computer or remotely in the DNS infrastructure. These are typically 8 steps in DNS lookup. When DNS information is cached, steps are skipped from the DNS lookup process, which makes it quicker. The example below outlines all 8 steps when nothing is cached. The 8 steps in a DNS lookup. The 8 steps in DNS lookup. Number 1. A user types example.com into a web browser and the query travels into the internet and is received by a DNS recursive resolver. That is step 1. Step 2. The resolver then queries a DNS root name server. The root server then responds to the resolver with the address of a top-level domain or TLD DNS server such as .com or .net, which stores the information. For example, .com, our request is pointed toward the .com TLD. Number 4, the resolver then makes a request to the .com TLD. Remember there are 8. Number 5, the TLD server then responds with the IP address of the domain name server. For example, .com, that is the domain name. Step 6. Lastly, the recursive resolver sends a query to the domain name server. 7. The IP address, for example, .com, is then returned to the resolver from the name server. The DNS resolver then responds to the web browser with the IP address of the domain request initialized. The DNS resolver then responds to the web browser with the IP address of the domain requested initially. Once the 8 steps of the DNS lookup have returned the IP address, for example, .com, the browser is able to make the request for the web page. Number 9. The browser makes a HTTP request to the IP address. Then number 10, the server at that IP address returns the web page to be rendered in the browser. The server at that IP address returns the web browser to be rendered in the browser. Returns the web page to be rendered in the web browser. So this is the illustration. The complete DNS lookup and web page query. So that is how it works continuously. What is a DNS resolver? Having looked at those various terms, let's look at what a DNS resolver is. The DNS resolver is the first stop in the DNS lookup and is responsible for dealing with the client that made the initial request. The resolver starts the sequence of queries that ultimately leads to a URL being translated into the necessary IP address. Note: a typical uncaged DNS lookup will resolve both recursive and iterative queries. It's important to differentiate between a recursive DNS query and a recursive DNS resolver. Those two are different. The query refers to the request made to a DNS resolver requiring the resolution of the query. A DNS recursive resolver is the computer that accepts a recursive query and processes the response by making the necessary requests. The illustration is below. DNS client follows a recursive query and gets to the DNS recursive resolver. What are the types of DNS queries? What are the types of DNS queries? What are the types of DNS queries? In a typical DNS lookup, three types of queries occur. By using a combination of these queries, an optimized process for DNS resolution can result in a reduction of distance traveled. In an ideal situation, cache record data will be available, allowing a DNS name server to return a non-recursive query. The three types of DNS queries. Number one, we have the recursive query. In a recursive query, a DNS client requires that a DNS server, typically a DNS recursive resolver, will respond to the client with either the requested resource record or an error message if the resolver can't find the record. That is the first type of the DNS query. The second one is the interactive query. In this situation, the DNS client will allow a DNS server to return the best answer it can. If the queried DNS server does not have a match for the query name, it will return a referral to a DNS server authoritative for the lower level of the domain namespace. The DNS client will then make a query to the referral address. This process continues with additional DNS servers down the query chain until either an error or timeout occurs. 3. A non-recursive query. Typically, this will occur when a DNS resolver client queries a DNS server for a record that it has access to, either because it's authoritative for the record or the record exists inside of its cache. Typically, a DNS server will cache DNS records to prevent additional bandwidth consumption and load on upstream servers. What is DNS caching? Where does DNS caching occur? The purpose of caching is to temporarily store data in a location that results in improvements in performance and reliability for data requests. DNS caching involves storing data closer to the requesting client so that the DNS query can be resolved earlier and additional queries further down the DNS lookup chain can be avoided, thereby improving load times and reducing bandwidth. Consumption. DNS data can be cached in a variety of locations, each of which will store DNS records for a set amount of time, determined by a time to live (TTL). Then we have browser DNS caching. Modern web browsers are designed by default to cache DNS records for a set amount of time. The purpose here is obvious. The closer the DNS caching occurs to the web browser, the fewer processing steps must be taken in order to check the cache and make the correct request to an IP address. When a request is made for a DNS record, the browser cache is the first location checked for the requested record. In Chrome, you can see the status of DNS cache by going to chrome:/net-internals/#DNS. That is in Chrome. Operating system level DNS caching. Operating system DNS caching. The operating system level DNS resolver is the second and last local stop before a DNS query leaves your machine. The process inside your operating system that is designed to handle this query is commonly called a stub resolver or DNS client. When a stub resolver gets a request form from an application, it first checks its own cache to see if it has the record. If it does not, it then sends a DNS query with a recursive flag set outside the local network to a DNS recursive resolver inside the internet service provider. When the recursive resolver inside the ISP receives the DNS query, like all previous steps, it will also check to see if the requested host to IP address translation is already stored inside its local persistence layer. The recursive resolver also has additional functionality depending on the types of records it has in its cache. Number 1. If the resolver does not have the A records but does have the NS records for the authoritative name servers, it will query those name servers directly by passing several steps in the DNS query. This shortcut prevents lookups from the root and .com servers and helps the resolution of the DNS query occur more quickly. If the resolver does not have the NS records, it will send a query to the TLD servers, skipping the root server. And number 3 is, in the unlikely event that the resolver does not have records pointing to the TLD servers, it will then query the root servers. This event typically occurs after a DNS cache has been purged.